The classical literary prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets, follow the basic thrust of this interpretation of events. They agree that the defeat and the exile are evidence rather than disproof of God's universal sovereignty, and they agree that they are God's just punishment for sin. But they're going to differ from the Deuteronomists in two significant ways. First, they're going to differ in their identification of that sin. For the prophets, it isn't just idolatry for which Israel is punished, although that's important too. And second of all, they're going to differ in their emphasis on a future restoration and a glory, a message that we don't find in the Deuteronomistic historian. The individual books of the prophets are really arranged according to two principles, interacting principles, size and chronology. So you have the first three books are the very large prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel in chronological order of the three crises we've outlined here. And then you have the minor prophets. And the minor prophets, again, are in roughly chronological order, although book size also plays a bit of a role in arranging these materials. And that was very common in the ancient world for size to determine the order of books in a corpus. We are not going to be following the order of the canon because it does jump around chronologically, first with the three large books and then going back and having some of the smaller books of earlier prophets. We're going to be looking at them in chronological order. We're going to be looking at them against the backdrop of the historical crisis to which they're responding. So we're going to begin with the first of the literary prophets, even though it's not the first in the order of the Bible, and that is Amos. And Amos preached during a relatively stable period of time. This was in the northern kingdom. It was around 750 under the reign of Jeroboam II, not the first. And this is at a time before the Assyrian threat is becoming very apparent, and Assyria's empire-building ambitions, before those are becoming very apparent. There are many passages that suggest that Amos was an ordinary shepherd. He came from a small town about 10 miles south of Jerusalem, so he came from the southern kingdom to prophesy in the northern kingdom. He was called to Bethel, which was one of the royal sanctuaries in the northern kingdom, to deliver his prophecies. But despite the suggestion that he was an ordinary shepherd, it seems more likely that he was probably a fairly wealthy owner of land and flocks. He was probably educated and literate. The northerners are said to be very surprised by his eloquence and his intelligence. But they didn't like his message, and ultimately he's going to be forced to go back to the southern kingdom. The book of Amos can be divided structurally into four sections. You first have a set of brief oracles of doom. These are in the first two chapters, Amos 1 and 2. And then you have a series of three short oracles to the women of Samaria, an oracle to the wealthy of Samaria and Jerusalem, and then an oracle to Israel as a whole. These are in chapters 3 through 6. This is followed then by 5 symbolic visions, which receive interpretation. These are visions of judgment. First, locusts, then a fire, then a plumb line that one uses in building a building, a basket of fruit, and then a vision of God standing by the altar at Bethel. This happens chapters 7 through 9, about verse 8 and 9. It also, this section, besides the 5 visions, also has a little narrative account of Amos's conflict with a priest at Bethel, the priest Amaziah, who accuses Amos of treason. And then there's a concluding epilogue in the 9th chapter that runs for about 7 or 8 verses to the end of the book.